Cycling offers so many benefits to individuals. It improves health and fitness, it's efficient, it's economical and accessible, and most of all, it's fun. It is a pure joy to travel on two wheels. And from a societal standpoint, encouraging more people to ride bikes has strong implications for public health, for the environment, for safety and livability of streets and communities. And yet, in New York City, trips by male bicycle commuters outnumber those by women 3-1. And that tracks pretty much with national figures. But there's real change on the horizon. 60% of bicycle owners aged 17 through 28 are women. So that says a lot about the next generation coming up. Women account for 37% of the bicycle market in 2011, spending $2.3 billion. 2/3 of American women agree my community would be a better place to live if biking were safer and more comfortable. It doesn't take much imagination to see that great potential exists in closing the gender gap, and that's why we're having this conversation today. So let's get to it. First up, I'm going to address this to each one of the panelists. I'd like to hear how you got started as adults riding a bicycle.
I don't drive. I do use public transportation in the city, but I wanted a means of transport that really felt like mine. I realized that the 30 minutes it took me to get across 14th Street on the bus could be done in 15 minutes by bike, but I hadn't ridden a bike since I was a teenager. So I bought a mountain bike and I started seeking out organized rides in Manhattan. And although my mountain bike had never seen a real mountain, I loved the sense of security that came with the ability to kind of ride over potholes with abandon.
My story is actually kind of simple. I also hadn't ridden a bike since I was a teenager. I always thought that was kind of something that crazy people did. And I don't know what happened, but my sister started riding her bike all over the city, and I was watching her do that, and I said, let me just try this. And I started riding her bike, and I started riding it a lot. And then she was like, okay, it's time for you to get your own bike to grow up. And next thing I knew, I had bought a bike and a bike store. So, but that's for later, I guess.
I started riding my bike in New York City when I was a college student in the late 90s at Columbia University. And the bike connected me to the rest of the city in a way that I wasn't able to do before. And because I started riding my bike, I actually did a research project on bicycle activism in New York City. And through the research, met a lot of really amazing New Yorkers that were using a bicycle as a tool to change the city. And that sort of began my more than 10 years of volunteering, organizing, working to bring bicycling to more New Yorkers, and eventually to a job at Transportation Alternatives.
So I had ridden a bike as a kid, and around the time I was 12, my mom started to enforce the you must wear a helmet rule, and my helmet must have been the most uncomfortable, horrible helmet ever, and it really killed my love for riding, and I stopped for a really long time until I was getting ready to graduate college, and I had a friend who was getting ready to go to Mexico for the summer and do this really long-distance bike tour, and they were going to do public health education, and she hadn't been riding at all, and she said, oh my God, I got to get in shape for this ride, and I started riding with her, and it was fun, and she left, and then the summer after I was sending out resumes, trying to get jobs, and I was super, super stressed out, and I just started riding my bike as a way to relax and unwind, and I kept riding, and then it wound up being that the first job I got out of college was actually working on a project to build a greenway in Providence, and I loved it because it was about economic development, it was about community revitalization, it was about connecting a neighborhood in Providence that had almost no transit or transportation access to downtown so people could get to jobs. It was about public health, and I just loved how you could kind of approach bicycling from all these different standpoints, and I started riding around just to get around, not just for recreation.
So in 2006, I was living in New York City and I decided to leave and join the Peace Corps. So I was sent to Burkina Faso in West Africa. And basically what they give you is a bike and they say this is how you're going to get around and how you're going to do your work. So I hadn't ridden a bike since I was in college, and I lived about 65 kilometers, which is about 35 miles from the nearest town with electricity. So if I wanted to go into town, especially in the rainy season, I had to ride my bike there. So when I came back from Peace Corps, I had to give my bike back, unfortunately. And so I knew that I wanted that freedom to sort of get on my bike and go, because it wasn't just a bicycle for practical use to get things done, but it was also the freedom of just going out and riding and going wherever I wanted. So when I came back, I bought my first bike from Bicycle Habitat, actually. And it took me a long time to get out onto the streets. I rode in the park, but I had a couple of friends who rode around a lot and they rode to work. And so slowly I started commuting to work, and just like they said down there, I mean, it's a 45-minute or an hour commute for me to get from my apartment on the Upper East Side to Harlem where I work, and it's literally 20 minutes on the bike. So if that gives me more time to sit in my apartment and watch TV or sleep longer, then I'll take it. So yeah.
So I'm going to move to Julie now, and I'm going to follow up on something you said, which was basically you started riding a bicycle, and next thing you knew, you opened a bike shop. So tell us, how did you decide to open a bike shop?
I started looking for a bike, and I started going around town and had a very varied experience in bike stores, and I found overall it was, very much geared towards men, and it wasn't necessarily a friendly place to walk into if you're a woman who didn't really know much about biking. Things have changed definitely since then. I think in the city there's more understanding, but at the 5 years ago, city bike wasn't a word that maybe you had heard so much. And so I started walking around, and I didn't see the bike I wanted, and I didn't have the experience that I wanted. And I said to my husband, someone should open a bike store for women that has really pretty bikes. And he said, you should do that. And I said, that's crazy. I'm a graphic designer. I don't know nothing about bikes. I don't even really ride a bike. And he said, but this is a really good idea. I think you should go further. And next thing I knew, seriously, I was at Interbike, the big bike show, and I was talking to people and realizing that this is something that I really needed to do. And I realized that, I had an opportunity to make something to get a lot of, to approach a different type of rider and to get more people on bikes. And that was something that really excited me.
I'd like to ask Diane to talk a little bit more about her experience. Diane is relatively new to cycling in the city, and when I first met her, she had taken a very considered approach to getting comfortable with riding on the streets of New York City. So I'd like to ask her a little bit more about how she accomplished that, because she's a very confident rider today.
Sure. When I started, I was terrified of riding in the streets of Manhattan. So it was something I'd not done before. I grew up in Queens. So I spent the first weeks very gingerly coasting around my home, which is Stuyvesant Town, and very illegally riding on some sidewalks. And I love the city. I'm a native New Yorker. My dad's actually a borough historian emeritus, and we grew up learning about our surroundings. So I started to seek out tours that teach. After I bought the bike, I signed up for my first bike tour, which was an Open House New York tour on the history of the Manhattan street grid. And that tour took us from 14th Street to 126th Street via 8th Avenue on a Saturday. And that single day knocked the fear of riding in traffic right out of me forever.
Let's talk a little bit about being comfortable in the bike lanes. I'm going to address this question to Carolyn. Surveys indicate that women favor cycling as a way of bettering their communities, and having safe places to ride would encourage more women to ride bicycles. Can you talk a little bit about street safety in New York City?
We often talk about the four main ways to make bicycling safer, and this is for anyone. It's great infrastructure, great bike lanes, more people riding bikes, because as more people ride bikes, the rate of crashes goes down. It's been proven in cities all over the world. Enforcement, because if the NYPD isn't taking a bike lane seriously, it doesn't really matter that the bike lane is there. And then education, thinking about how we can empower young people, children, high school students across the board to learn to ride and to learn to ride safely. one really interesting thing that I want to just end on is that currently our city doesn't actually keep count of gender riding, so differences between men and women. We have census data, and we know that there is a 3-to-1 in favor of men ridership. But 2 years ago, there was some bad press coverage about a protected bike lane in New York City, and the reporters were claiming that the notion that bike lanes encourage more women to ride just simply wasn't true. And this made me really mad. So I scheduled a bike lane count, and I scheduled it on a street with no bike lane, a street with a painted bike lane, and a street with a protected bike lane. And we stood out on the street for 2 hours in all 3 spots and did a count, and we compared number of men riding versus number of women riding. And, it was pretty straightforward. There was more than double the number of women riding on the street with the protected bike lane than there were on the street with no bike lane. So certainly bike lanes aren't the only solution, but I think when we think about encouraging all types of people to ride, gender, age, we can do a lot when we build great infrastructure.
Women are embracing bike share systems in other cities. 49% of Capital Bike Share members in Washington, D.C. are women. 47% of current or expired Boston Hubway members are women. 44% of Nice Ride Bike Share members in Minneapolis are women. What characteristics of bike sharing make this public transit option appealing to women, do you think?
I think for bike share, it's the convenience of it. It's an on-demand transportation system. It's partly the freedom that Stephanie mentioned, but it's also, you don't have to deal with any sort of bike maintenance. You don't have to lug a bike up a few flights of stairs to your apartment or find a place to store it if your apartment's already crowded. It's transportation when you need it, where you need it, on your terms, and someone else is kind of taking care of all the other details. Some women love the thrill of like maintaining and cleaning their own bike, and are really into the components and the parts and the geeking out on like the hardware of the bike. But some women just want to get where they're going when they want to go, and I think for them, bike share is a great way to do it. Get a little extra exercise. You get to see more of the neighborhoods that you're riding through, and at the end of the day, you get to return it, and you don't have to worry about where to store it or how to keep it in good shape.